Have you ever felt lost? Not physically lost, but rather trapped in your own head about where to go next, where your life's been headed, or whether you even deserve to go there. Maybe you once had a clear picture or even a blurry goal, but it's so distant now it feels like a pipe dream. If any of that sounds familiar, then you felt just like Shadow the Hedgehog. Bear with me. First introduced in Sonic Adventure 2, Shadow the Hedgehog has been a staple of the Sonic franchise, swiftly positioning himself as the second most popular character next to the titular Blue Hedgehog. As with many characters in the series, Shadow has undergone plenty of changes, big and small, across his many game appearances and various other interpretations, leading to a somewhat fractured consensus of who he is in the eyes of the fandom. But Shadow's characterization mishaps exceed the scope of this video. For the purposes of today, you'll have to deal with how I interpret the character, because beneath the slick design and slew of exciting abilities, lies an ongoing struggle that I think is eerily relatable. Sure, you can say I'm exaggerating, that he's just a cool spiky guy with guns and call it a day, but that's lame. For the uninitiated, let's do a quick rundown. Aboard a super advanced space colony, Shadow the Hedgehog was bioengineered as a result of three converging yet conflicting interests. Professor Gerald's desire to save his granddaughter Maria from an incurable disease, the project's financial backers wanting to discover immortality, and Black Doom wanting the most powerful warrior for his army. We can even throw in Gun's constant nagging for weapons research too. Both Black Doom and the government took advantage of Gerald's desperation, but that desperation would lead him to developing progressively more dangerous experiments until the Ark was raided and shut down in a cover-up operation. Even if we were to ignore the Black Doom lore retroactively retconned into SA2's plot, Shadow's story hits the ground running and it does not let up. Government conspiracies, space projects, bioweapons, the works. But more importantly, I wanted to highlight the expectations placed upon the character from well even before his birth, a heavy yoke around the character's neck that would come to constantly haunt him for years after the Ark incident. As I alluded to from the start though, you don't need to be an artificial creation to struggle finding your purpose, your convictions. But it's a fairly common theme in media to discuss the nature of life and how we choose to lead it through characters created in labs, often with twisted intent. Although these stories are often over the top and exaggerated, the looming question remains universal. Why am I here? Who am I? I'm sure you've asked yourself these questions. Even well before his amnesia arc, these were questions Shadow pondered constantly. But let's back up a little. Such a tumultuous creation and upbringing would be enough to stress out anyone, and make them question their own existence. Add Shadow's many conflicting, predetermined duties, and you'll have a character who is deeply, inconsolably troubled. If it weren't for one thing, Maria. Although never fully dispelling Shadow's feelings of self-doubt back in the Ark days, Maria's friendship seemed to have been the closest thing to giving Shadow a purpose to hold on to, a duty that felt truly his own, not imposed onto him by anyone else. Whether that's through the reassurance that he'll find answers on Earth once she's cured and allowed to go down there, or through the simple comfort of having someone believe in him, see him as more than a weapon or experiment, see him as a friend. That relationship kept Shadow relatively grounded, like hope, shining right through his doubt. Of course, though, it wouldn't last.
Maria!
I think it's a little funny we live in a time where people fault Maria's wishes for making Shadow less independent, when to me, she always represented Shadow's purest sense of self. What I mean is, her presence, her memory, always seemed to push Shadow towards finding his purpose, rather than shoving him into one specific box. Maria's death essentially threw all of Shadow's original purposes or expectations to the wayside, in favor of Gerald losing his mind and imbuing Shadow with a brand new goal.
Revenge!
To me, it's interesting, to say the least, how terrifying the weight of expectations must have been for Shadow, only for all those possible routes to be forcibly taken away, creating a void and leaving Shadow in the perfect mental space for being manipulated into numbing his own self-doubt, forgoing his quest for purpose, and becoming someone else's weapon, a harbinger of vengeance, a pawn in someone else's plot. Yes, his memories were tampered with to ensure he would carry out his new mission, but without the grief from the loss and the crushing disappointment of failing at everything he was created for, a few censored memories probably wouldn't have been enough to compel him to obey. Shadow, then, goes from being overwhelmed by possibilities and by his own fear of turning into a mindless weapon, like many other experiments in the arc did, to giving up entirely on finding himself. And as soon as he awakens 50 years later, he devotes himself fully to the twisted wishes of a once good-natured scientist and a false promise, essentially turning that fear into a self-fulfilling prophecy. We all know how the story goes from here, though. Ironically, I think Shadow's trip to Earth really did help him find answers. Despite all the property damage and terrorism,
this incident increased worldwide terrorist activities.
Shadow's encounters with Sonic, Amy, and Rouge really helped him begin to understand the world and understand himself by the end of the story. We get to see flashes of the real personality beneath the rage-fueled facade, his playful confidence, his doubt and guilt, his willingness to sacrifice for others. By the time the story is nearing its climax, Shadow comes to even respect Sonic's stubbornness and attitude towards life, but he can't let go of the only goal currently giving him a semblance of meaning.
I see, but you know, I can't let you live.
It's not until Amy coincidentally echoes Maria's final words that Shadow finally breaks free from Gerald's manipulation, the true memory of Maria compelling him to make his own choice, to learn to forgive himself and protect life rather than destroy it. He may rationalize it as a promise to an old friend, but deep down I think you can see him acting of his own volition too, in honor of Maria's memory, not as a debt to her, but because her positive influence has truly impacted him, made him a better person. That's why he's seemingly horrified by the professor's actions from then on. That's why he begins to sound so desperate. He can't fail Maria again, but he also can let himself go again. Maria's wish represents a path Shadow has to choose for himself, among the predetermined expectations thrust onto him. It's not a command, and I would argue, even when the promise itself is to bring happiness or hope to humanity, it's really more about Shadow not losing his way, for him to believe in himself, in that he could do as much good as he wanted to, that he should never be afraid of becoming a monster. I think that line of thinking further elevates the Bio-Lizard and Final Hazard boss fights as well, as Shadow fighting the metaphorical wishes of his creator turned manifest, the literal sins of the past, and the prototype of himself, a monstrous, unintelligent creature barely holding on to life, lashing out at the command of a long-dead man like his weapon, the exact thing Shadow was on his way to becoming. The way I see it, in standing up to Gerald's revenge plot, Shadow was standing on his own 2 feet, not just representing Maria, but all the same hoping to make her proud. Perhaps that was always his wish. From here on, different writers, mandates, and iterations of the brand would at times enhance and at times muddy this storyline. But if one thing persisted in my mind, it was Shadow's quest for purpose.
He was always at his darkest when he abandoned all hope for finding answers, not necessarily to his past, but to who he is and who he could be. Shadow may not have all the answers, and his head may in fact start to spin now and then. But I think through listening to his own heart, and guided by his best memories of Maria, as his current flagship theme song says, he has found meaning. I think that what Shadow's journey ultimately illustrates is that it's okay to not quite know your purpose, that perhaps there isn't one clearly defined. Your purpose, what you fight for, can be reconfigured, changed. Answers about our worth don't come to us. We have to make them ourselves. Through that quest, we learn to value what truly matters, define who we are no matter how lost. And in that constant, cyclical search for purpose, it's entirely possible to still find meaning, to proudly affirm one's own existence amidst the chaos.